Good evening, lover of dark stories. Did you come for the story? Or did the story come for you? If you're here, it's because you like stories that stick in your head, right? The ones that haunt you in the silence of the night, that make you question just how far reality goes, and what truly resides beyond what you can see. Well then, get ready. The story today will stay with you for a long time. Perhaps you'll never look at the dark the same way again. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the bell. Put on your headphones and let yourself be enveloped by every word. And remember, when you start listening to a story like this, it has the power to find you when you least expect it. Stay alert. After all, you never know when the shadows decide to show their face. Let's go. Get ready for the real story of a Pokémon episode. But don't expect what you're thinking. This isn't about colorful adventures or cute creatures. It goes much further than that. There's something else behind this story. And that's what we'll uncover together. It all started with an apparently normal Pokémon episode. Something that took place in the lives of thousands of children in the 90s. An episode so ordinary that no one would ever imagine it would be the starting point for one of the most macabre stories in television history. I was there, watching the same program as thousands of children around the world. The screen shone before me with the vibrant colors of the animation. But something was wrong. I could feel it. A strange sensation, an unease I couldn't explain. The episode that turned into a nightmare had a sequence of flashing images. Quick flashes, two bright colors, as if they were trying to force your attention onto something beyond the animation. At that moment, the children began to feel sick. Some fell to the ground, others screamed in pain, as if something were consuming them from the inside. What seemed like a simple cartoon show turned into a field of chaos. Doctors were stunned. Children began having seizures. Approximately 700 children were taken to hospitals across the world, all with the same symptoms. Epilepsy. The explanation seemed too simple, but no one could understand what was happening. How could such an innocent episode cause something so devastating? Authorities began to investigate, but what they discovered was something few could imagine. None of this was a coincidence. The real story wasn't on the screen. It was behind everything, but no one was prepared for what would follow. I didn't know what was happening myself. I was just another child watching the episode. But as the doctors scrambled to find scientific explanations, I began to hear rumors. A rumor that at first seemed like nonsense started to spread. The creator of that episode had made a dark pact to ensure the success of the series. He had promised thousands of souls to hell in exchange for audience and fame. And the worst part, this pact was beginning to fulfill itself. The scariest part of all this is that the secret wasn't revealed immediately. It was as if, somehow, those flashes that had caused the seizures were more than just flashing lights on the screen. They were trying to send a message from beyond. I remember perfectly the moment I first heard this. I was in a group of friends discussing the episode when someone whispered, "You don't know what really happened, do you?" That was intentional. At first, I thought it was just another conspiracy theory. But as time passed, more things started to make sense. It was as if the episode was alive, as if it were manipulating the children, influencing their minds. Something much deeper and more malevolent was happening, and no one seemed to truly understand what was behind it. Got to the doctors. All of this seemed surreal. They tried to argue that the phenomenon was just an accident, a particularly stimulating episode for younger minds. But deep down, something told me there was more, something beyond reason and science. And the most disturbing part was when things started to spiral out of control. It wasn't just the episode, it was what it represented. Every child who had watched the episode and suffered from the seizures was, in some way, being marked. As if the light from the episode was imbued with something evil, something beyond human understanding. The doctors couldn't explain it, but the seizures were only the beginning. Everything we knew about that cartoon was being turned upside down. And the worst part was that no one was prepared for what would come next. What no one knew at that moment, not even the experts, was that the Pokémon episode that caused seizures in children was not just an accident. It was much more than a technical failure. It wasn't a simple animation error, nor was it an intense episode for children, as they had tried to justify. Something was manipulating the process, as if something or someone was controlling the events, the scene, the flashes, even the energy surrounding that broadcast. And the worst part, the origin of it was far from natural. When I started researching something that made me believe the explanation might be much closer than I had imagined. The rumor about the creator of the episode wasn't just a conspiracy theory. It was a much darker reality. The creator of the episode, a man whose identity was widely unknown to most, was described as someone with a peculiar taste for occult rituals. At first, he seemed just like a regular name, someone with a great passion for animation. But as the research progressed, I discovered that the man had a dark past, much darker than anyone could imagine. He had connections to secret societies, and according to some anonymous sources, he had made a pact to ensure the success of the Pokémon series. You probably wouldn't believe this. Who could imagine that a children's animation would be the medium for a promise made to hell? But as time went on, and more children fell ill, this pact started to make more sense. It wasn't just a program. It was an open door, and not to the world of imagination, but to a darker place, a place that no one should even mention. The pact he had made was not just a simple wish. He didn't want fame or power. He had a much more sinister goal: to collect souls. For him, creating Pokémon wasn't just about making a successful series. It was an opportunity, and he knew exactly how to manipulate the minds of children to fulfill what he had promised. But it was then that, through a deep investigation, I discovered that there were a series of subliminal images in the episode that no one had noticed before. Quick flashes, images flickering for a fraction of a second, faster than the human eye could catch. The images were disturbing. When analyzed in slow motion, what seemed to be just lights and colors transformed into distorted faces, shadowy figures, and occult symbols. They weren't just colorful patterns. They were marks, codes, and invocations. The episode had been created in such a way that the human brain couldn't process everything at once. And when the brain tried to understand what was happening, it was as if it was being flooded with a flow of energy that it simply couldn't control. I saw it with my own eyes. The images were there, flashing one by one in a frantic rhythm. And even though they hadn't been noticed by doctors initially, the effect was clear. Something was corrupting the children's minds, messing with their senses in a way that shouldn't have been possible. The most terrifying part was when I realized that these images weren't there by chance. They weren't just a visual distraction. They were there for a specific purpose: to summon something much older and far darker. The children watching that episode were being drawn into a spell of a nature that even the doctors couldn't understand. But the seizures were just the beginning. The children who had watched this episode began to develop stranger symptoms. Some started having horrible nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night screaming. And in more extreme cases, some of them began to act in completely abnormal ways. They spoke in strange tongues. Their expressions became distorted, as if something had taken control of them. And while the doctors tried to justify it all as psychosomatic trauma due to the episode, the truth was much more macabre. Something was being awakened in the children, something that could not be simply explained by medicine. It was as if the episode had opened a door between two worlds. And the creator knew this. He knew what he was doing when he put together that episode with so many subliminal details. He didn't just want fame, he wanted the souls. Then things began to get worse. Not just for the affected children, but for anyone who had watched that episode. The evil didn't stay confined to the hospitals and clinics. It spread. People began to feel uncomfortable around the television screen. The energy from the episode seemed to linger in the children's homes, contaminating the environments. They said the lights began to flicker on their own, and images from the episode would appear in places they shouldn't. And as the days went by, the symptoms worsened. The doctors were losing control of the situation, and I could see that no one was prepared to face what was really happening. And here comes the darkest part. The children who had been affected by the episode started disappearing. One by one, their names vanished from the hospital lists. These weren't common disappearances. No one knew where they were going, but those who searched deeply discovered that they had been taken to a place that could not be accessed. And who was behind it? The creator of the series himself. But no one wanted to believe it. No one was willing to admit that something so macabre was happening. And the more I investigated, the more I realized that the pieces were fitting together. What was happening wasn't just a technical mistake. It was a ritual that had been initiated long before anyone imagined. I was already deeply immersed in it. As the disappearances began to increase, the feeling that the truth was being covered up became inescapable. The doctors were desperate, the media was trying to suppress the cases, and the parents, upon realizing what was happening, started questioning reality of the episode. But no one was prepared for what was behind all of this. The truth wasn't just in the quick flashes or hidden symbols. The creator of the Pokémon episode had planned this meticulously. With every step, he was getting closer to fulfilling the pact he had made. But something I discovered during my investigations changed everything. He was no longer in control. The pact with Hell was not just a trade agreement. It was a way to open a door to another dimension. One that was being fed by the souls he was collecting. He didn't want just fame. He was creating a portal. And the children were the fuel for that portal. The disappearances weren't coincidence. When the children started to disappear, they were being taken to this other world, a dark and twisted place where everything seemed to be in ruins. And those who didn't disappear, those still lying in their hospital beds, were marked. They were being consumed slowly, their souls drained by the presence of that malevolent energy that had been released. And no matter how much they tried to explain it scientifically, the truth was right in front of everyone. Something demonic was behind all of it. I found myself caught in a spiral of mystery, trying to understand how the creator of the series had managed to open this door, and what was really behind the pact. During my research, I found something that left me speechless. A specific ritual, a kind of invocation that the creator used to ensure the success of the show. This ritual was not simple. It involved a complex set of symbols, ceremonies, and an even more macabre ingredient, human energy. The idea was that the children's souls would be used to fuel the pact. And the Pokémon episode was just the first step in a process that would lead to something even darker. Slowly, I began to find hidden messages, not only in the episodes, but also in the content of the series itself. Pokémon was not just a cartoon about monsters and battles. It was an allegory for what was happening, with the very Pokémons representing entities from the beyond, disguised to seem harmless. And over time, the children who watched the episode began to see strange things, as if the creatures from the show were becoming real, invading their dreams and eventually, their lives. I didn't know who to trust anymore. The doctors were being silenced, and anyone who tried to investigate was being dismissed, as if an invisible shadow was controlling everything. Even the parents of the affected children were being led to believe that their children were simply having an adverse reaction to the episode, unaware that they were being led to a much worse fate. And it was then that, one night, I discovered the central point of all this. The key to the pact was in a single episode, a sequence of images that was broadcast at a specific moment, during a night when the energies of the world were in perfect alignment. I rewatched that episode more times than I can count, trying to understand the logic behind the images, until I finally noticed something at the moments when the screen flickered. Between the flashes of light and strange sounds, there was a line of text subtly hidden, a line that no one had noticed, but that now seemed to shine in my mind like a sign. The darkness is already here. The door has been opened. These words weren't visible to the naked eye. They were subliminal images that only those aware of the true nature of the series could perceive. This wasn't just a game of colors and sounds. It was a warning. The creator of the episode knew exactly what he was doing. He had managed to deceive the entire world, creating a false reality around a successful series. But in reality, he was feeding a much more powerful force, a force that was now taking shape. I decided to follow the trail, to go where the clues led me. Everything pointed to the creator being hidden, and his location was harder to discover than I had imagined. The authorities were being manipulated by an invisible force. Every attempt at investigation seemed to be thwarted by something greater. But I couldn't stop. The children were still disappearing, and I knew that if I didn't find a way to close this door, more souls would be lost. But what I didn't know was that by following this path, I was also becoming part of the pact. By investigating, I was involuntarily linking myself to the same dark energy that had been released. And as I delved deeper, the marks began to appear in my own life. The same symbols that had been seen in the episode began to appear around me. In every corner, in every shadow, there was a feeling that something was watching me. Something was controlling me. And then one day, I received a message. A direct warning. A symbol appeared on my door. A dark stain, as if something had been etched there without explanation. And then, I knew. The creator was no longer the only one in control. Something much more powerful had awakened, and it was coming to take me. The message that appeared on my door was not the first sign that something was deeply wrong, but it was enough to make me realize that I was being watched. The feeling that something greater was in control became more evident with each passing minute. I found myself trapped in an endless nightmare, and no matter how much I tried to find a logical explanation for what was happening, the evidence that there were forces beyond human comprehension was too clear to ignore. When the message appeared, my reaction was instinctive. I turned quickly, my heart racing. There was something about that symbol that sent a chill down my spine, as if it were a key to something far more dangerous than I could have imagined. The walls of my house seemed to close in, and the pressure grew. I didn't know if the symbol was a threat or an invitation, but in those dark hours, one thing was clear. I couldn't ignore it. If I wanted to understand what was happening, I needed to follow this trail. I spent days searching for explanations. I found nothing in any books, no records, not even in obscure sources. And the more I investigated, the more I realized I was alone on this path. But I also knew the truth wouldn't stay hidden forever. And as scared as I was, something inside me told me this was my only chance to reverse what was happening. The most terrifying thing of all came when the call arrived. At night, like a soft whisper, as if the shadows were calling me. The number was unknown, but I answered. The voice on the other end of the line was muffled, almost like an echo. It was hard to understand, but one word stood out: door. Then, the voice fell silent, and I stood there, motionless, with the phone in my hand. What did that mean? The next day, the symptoms began to intensify. I don't know what was happening, but the shadows in my house began moving strangely. I could see shapes in every corner, outlines on the walls, as if something was watching me. Every time I closed my eyes, it felt like something was getting closer. And when I looked in the mirror, my reflection didn't seem the same. It was as if someone or something was inside me. Fear settled in my chest, and no matter how much I wanted to escape, I didn't know where to go. But something more disturbing was happening. The energy around me seemed to be changing. It was as if the very atmosphere was charged with an unusual electricity. Each night became longer, and with the silence, fear took over me. It was like I was being led into a trap I couldn't escape. I knew that the Pokémon episode was directly linked to this. The creator was no longer the only one involved in this dark pact. He had opened a portal, and I, for some reason, was at the center of it all. The children, whose souls he had collected, were now part of something bigger. Something that was, slowly but surely, drawing nearer. I decided the only way to understand all of this was to go back to the origin. The creator of the series. It was him I needed answers from. But where was he? How could I find someone who had hidden himself so well? Someone who had manipulated reality around him. The search for him became an obsession, and that's when I knew the creator was hiding in a place where no one could find him. A place where the physical world and the spiritual world met. A place that had been hidden, even from those seeking the truth. The door. I didn't know exactly what the door was, but I knew that's where he was. And if I wanted to end all of this, I needed to find it. My journey led me to the outskirts of the city, to a place that, at first glance, seemed abandoned. I was following a strange feeling, something telling me to continue. The cold wind cut through my face, and each step seemed to echo through the deserted streets. Then, I found it. There wasn't a physical door, but rather a hidden portal, concealed by the shadows of reality. As I looked at it, I felt a presence, something that shouldn't be there. I was standing before a veil, a thin line between two worlds. I knew that if I crossed it, there would be no turning back. The presence in the air was oppressive, as if the very space was trying to swallow me. Whatever was on the other side, it wasn't something any human should face. I was standing before the final point of the story. Before taking the final step, a feeling of coldness overtook me. I looked back, but there was nothing left to connect me to the world I knew. What lay before me was something far beyond my comprehension. I was about to enter a place where the dead and the living met, where the rules of reality dissolved. Closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them, I saw the creator of the episode before me, as if he had been waiting for my arrival. "You're here," he said, his voice seeming to come from all directions. A distorted voice, as if time itself was fragmenting. And at that moment, I knew there was no going back. The game had begun, and the door finally had been opened. The air was thick, almost palpable, and every breath I took felt heavier than the last. I was standing before the creator, the man who had started it all, the one who, in his insatiable pursuit of fame and power, had made a diabolical pact that not only affected the children of that episode, but was now about to engulf the entire world. The sensation that I was in a place beyond comprehension was immense. I was on the threshold between two worlds, where reality was unraveling before my eyes, and I no longer knew what was real or illusion. He didn't seem like a grand figure, someone who would have the power to open portals and manipulate souls. The Creator stood there before me, but his presence was almost invisible, as if he were a shadow feeding off my own perception. His face was distorted, yet familiar, and empty, expression reflecting a deep void within his soul. What did he want from me? What did he have to say? He smiled, a cold, empty smile, as if death had already made a home in his eyes. And then he spoke, with a voice that seemed to echo in my mind, more than in my ears. You've made it this far. You want to know the truth? What really happened in that episode? What I promised, and what I received? He paused, as if savoring my anxiety. I'm not the only one responsible for this, you know. What you're facing? What's happening with the children, with the souls? It's not an accident. I just took the first step. The true purpose of the episode was never just to entertain. It was the key. The key to opening something much greater. I tried to take a deep breath, trying to process his words. What do you mean by greater? He looked directly at me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I promised souls. I opened a door that you, just like everyone else, are going through beyond comprehension. The children, the families, all of us, we're stuck in a cycle you cannot escape. You want to know what really happened? I am the messenger. But the true entity, it will take everything. His words formed a nightmare. I didn't know if I was hearing or experiencing. He spoke with a terrifying calmness, as if he had already accepted the inevitable. As if the pact was about to be fulfilled, and he was just a spectator, watching the world be consumed by what he himself had invoked. So, you can't reverse this? I asked, feeling hopelessness spread through my body. There's no way to stop it? He shook his head, a bitter smile on his lips. There's no turning back. The door has been opened. What you see here, what you feel, all of this is already happening. You're here in this place because you are part of this. By investigating, by seeking the truth, you've already made your choice. You've connected to the energy that now flows through the world. I could feel my body pulling away from reality, as if it were slowly disintegrating, becoming part of this other dimension. Fear grew inside me, and at the same time, a sense of helplessness took over. There was no more control. There was no more escape. I was trapped here, on the threshold between worlds, with a choice that didn't seem to be mine. So, what happens now? My voice trembled, but I knew the answer was inevitable. The Creator just looked at me, as if there was nothing more to be said. But before I could ask anything else, the atmosphere around us began to change. The darkness began to spread, a slow and inevitable movement. The light in the environment faded, and the sound around me distorted. I felt the presence of something much greater, an entity, a force that was watching everything from afar, waiting to manifest. I was at the breaking point. What was before me was no longer a simple search for the truth. I had crossed the boundaries of what could be understood by a human mind. And when I realized that, the door in front of me opened wider. It wasn't just a physical portal. It was a door to another reality, a reality that challenged me to understand what was real. The sensation that something was about to consume me enveloped me. The Creator was no longer by my side. He had vanished, as if he were part of the darkness that had taken over the place. I was now alone, facing the entity he had unleashed. The walls of the place began to close in, and the air became unbreathable. Each breath seemed to drag me deeper, and then, in a moment of pure clarity, I saw it. I saw the creatures, the distorted faces of the children who had been taken. They were all there, at the edge of space, like lost souls, like fragments of a reality unraveling. They were waiting to be consumed, waiting for me to make my final choice. I looked at the shadows that now took form around me, and I knew there was no more time. The true door was in front of me. It was opening, taking everything and everyone who passed through it to an uncertain fate. The entity was here, and I had reached the end. Are you ready to cross? A deep, empty voice asked, and not knowing what else to do, I took the final step. A step that would take me to a place where reality and the beyond meet, where nothing was as it seemed. The moment I crossed the portal was not like any experience I had ever lived. It wasn't a simple change of environment, nor a transition between worlds. It was more like the dissolution of my own perception. experienced was ripped away from me and replaced with an immense darkness. The air was thick, almost icy. I didn't know if I was in a physical place or if I had been transported to another dimension. Everything around me was distorted, as if the very space itself was bending, breaking, rearranging into shapes that didn't belong in this world. The colors were no longer natural, but subdued, as if the light had already been consumed by something that couldn't be described. I felt a pressure in my chest, a sensation as if something was watching me. It wasn't the creator, it wasn't any human figure. It was a presence, something greater, waiting for me in this place. Something that knew exactly who I was, what I had done, what I was seeking. "Welcome," the voice echoed, "not coming from any specific place, but from the entire environment around me. You're finally here, where the souls intertwine with the void. You've come to us, like all the others." The words had no shape, but they materialized in my mind with a disturbing clarity. I was being tested, challenged to understand that. I had crossed a limit far beyond my comprehension. The feeling that something was about to consume me enveloped me even more. Each step I took in this dark space seemed to take me deeper, farther from any hope. But deep down, I knew there was no more escape. What I was searching for, the truth I wanted to discover, was here, in this place where time and space didn't apply the way we knew them. And then, suddenly, something began to form before me. A figure. It wasn't a human figure, but something that evoked an older presence, a shape reminiscent of something from a nightmare. It was a figure that moved, not in a physical way, but as if space itself was being shaped by the will of that entity. It approached slowly, with a terrifying calmness, as if it knew I had nowhere to run. "You thought you could escape, didn't you?" said the entity, its voice deep and laden with a gravity that made the environment feel even more oppressive. "You thought the truth, the real truth, was at your disposal. But you're already lost, just like everyone else who tried to uncover what's behind this world." I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. It was as if something was holding me back, preventing me from forming clear thoughts. The pressure was mounting, and the air was becoming heavier. I was being consumed, not physically, but in my essence. It was as if the world itself was swallowing me, slowly disintegrating me. The figure in front of me revealed itself more clearly, and I could see what it was. It had no face, no form that could be classified. It was a mixture of shadows, silhouettes that seemed to change constantly, as if it were a reflection of all the fears, all the anguish that had been generated throughout human history. And then, with a sudden movement, the entity manifested. "And the door," it said. "And you, like all those who came before you, are now part of the cycle." The creator knew what he was doing, but he didn't understand the weight of his choice. He thought he could control everything, that he could play with human souls. But now, he will be consumed as well. And you, who came here, will also be. I didn't know what to do. The feeling of helplessness was total. I had been consumed by something beyond my understanding, and there was no turning back. I couldn't reverse the evil that had already been unleashed. The pact had been fulfilled, and the souls that had been promised were being taken to this place. The entity moved closer to me, and I felt a wave of cold penetrate to my bones. It wasn't just physical cold, but a sensation of emptiness, as if the universe itself was being erased around me. "Now you are one of us," it said. "Your soul, like the others, will be consumed and added to our cycle. What happened to the children was just the beginning. You are already part of this." I tried to resist. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. There was no sound, no escape. I was there, in a place where there was no more time, where there was no more salvation. Evil was consuming everything, and I was just a piece in the machine. The entity began to disappear, but its words kept echoing in my mind. "No matter how hard you try, no matter how far you run, what has been done cannot be undone." And at that moment, everything around me started to collapse. The space that was once dark transformed into an infinite void, where nothing existed anymore except a deep and absolute silence. The shadows disappeared, the shapes disintegrated. I was alone. Or maybe I wasn't. Perhaps what was before me was just another part of the cycle, a lie within another lie, where I was condemned to exist forever, where nightmares never cease, where all that remains is the void. And then a single word appeared in my mind, like a distant whisper. And at that moment, the void consumed me. The darkness surrounding me now was not like any darkness I had ever experienced. There was no depth, no sound of my own breath seemed to echo endlessly, as if I were lost in an abyss with no way out. I didn't know where I was, or even if I still existed, but somewhere, I felt that something was watching me, that some force, older and more powerful, was keeping its eye on me. I tried to move, but the air was thick and sticky, as if the very substance of reality had become an unbearable weight. There was no ground, no ceiling, only the sensation of floating, of being suspended in a space where the laws of physics no longer applied. And yet, I knew I was being pulled somewhere, to some fate I couldn't understand. "You're still here," a voice said, not coming from any specific place, but from all around me, as if the void itself were speaking to me. "Still trying to fight, still trying to escape. But what you don't understand is that you're already lost. You came here because you made a choice, and now there's no turning back." I didn't want to hear anymore. I didn't want to know. But something inside me, a small and desperate part, insisted on asking, why? Why all of this? What really happened? The voice responded, darker than before. "Do you think the Creator was the only one responsible for everything? He didn't know, but he played his part. You're here now, because you're next. It wasn't just him who made the pact. Each of you who searched, who investigated, who questioned what you shouldn't have, became part of this. The door was opened, and now it can never be closed." These words reverberated in my mind, a bitter truth that imposed itself before me with the force of a torrent. I was lost, yes, but not just me. All those who approached this secret, all those who tried to understand what was behind the episode, were now immersed in this dark fate. Every soul that was drawn in, every child that fell into the trap of that episode, now belonged to something greater. Something much greater than any of us could understand. "You're starting to understand," the voice continued, now closer, more imposing. "But that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that you, like all the others, are now trapped. The pact has been sealed, and the souls that were given can no longer be rescued. What happened to the children was only the beginning. What's coming goes beyond anything you've ever witnessed." I wanted to scream. I wanted to resist, but there was no sound. There were no more words. The void swallowed me, suffocated me, and I found myself being dragged into a dimension of pure darkness and silence. Something began to take shape before me, but it wasn't physical. It was a presence, an energy growing, something that could not be described with human words. It was as if the very essence of evil was materializing before my eyes, as if space itself was being molded by a force that was beyond my control. "You see now," the voice said, "the true nature of this place. What has been released is no longer a simple story. It's no longer just a cartoon. You are at the center of the evil that has been unleashed. What you see here, what you feel, is the consequence of choices made long before you arrived." I was being absorbed, not physically, but in my very essence. I no longer knew where reality ended, and where this infinite void began. I felt the weight of the history, the weight of the souls that had been lost, the weight of the pact that had been fulfilled. And as I sank deeper into this abyss, I began to understand the entity I had faced, the creator of the episode, were not the only ones responsible. They were just the messengers, the instruments of something much larger, something that was preparing to consume the world, and I was being dragged into it, unable to stop it. The void around me began to move, as if the darkness itself was taking form. The feeling that something greater was coming, something beyond any human or creature, became uncontrollable. I didn't know what would become of me. I no longer knew if I was still a person, if I was still a soul. Everything seemed to disintegrate around me. And then, suddenly, the presence manifested again, this time stronger than ever. It was as if all the voices that had been swallowed by this evil were now speaking through it. "Welcome to the end, where souls become one with the void. There is no escape. There is no resistance." I was at the center of something I didn't understand, something that couldn't be undone. The pact was complete. There was no turning back. The souls had been consumed. Evil had been released, and the cycle was now complete. Comment below what you think, and if you're brave enough, come back tomorrow. There's always a new story waiting for you, ... But remember, some stories never end.